Hello and welcome to the Vaults of Terra. My name is Ed and today we're going to be celebrating the fact that we're now at 27,500 subscribers. I was going to do this at 25,000 subscribers, but it's been a while. So, to celebrate this massive new number, I have decided to do an overview video of something that everyone has been requesting for a very long time. Yes, today is the day I do an overview video of the Horus Heresy. Now, the Horus Heresy was one of the most violent and devastating events in the life of the early Imperium, and this is where son fought father and brother fought brother for the domination of this new human superpower, and the results of which can still be felt in the Imperium today. Now, a bit of background to the Horus Heresy. At the time of the Horus Heresy, the Great Crusade had been reconquering the galaxy in the Imperium's name for approximately 200 years. The Emperor had rediscovered all of his lost sons, although 2 had disappeared from history at this point, and the legions were stronger than ever. The Emperor then retired to Terra, leaving Horus, his most militarily successful Primarch and beloved first discovered son, in overall command of the Crusade as its War Master. Although honoured, Horus at his core doubted his abilities to command, and was unsure as to why the Emperor had abandoned the military front in order to return to Terra. And from these seeds of doubt, twisted by the powers of chaos, would the Horus Heresy grow. Now, there are several preliminary causes that led up to the Horus Heresy, and these all contributed to the ignition of the heresy in Horus, alongside the planning of the Chaos powers, which is a given at this stage. Now, first was the Emperor returning to Terra to work on the Webway project in secret, which alienated his sons who thought he was abandoning the Great Crusade. Of course, he didn't tell his sons about the Webway project, although why I'd never know, although of course it was probably to keep it from getting out, or any of the forces of chaos knowing about it, because they would obviously try to disrupt such a work. The second was the forming of the Council of Terra, which is made up of mortal human bureaucrats, mostly, whom the Astartes and the Primarchs resented taking any orders from, being genetically superior to these humans, and more of a warrior mindset than the Council, which was more interested in feeding and populating the Imperium with loyal citizens. Lastly was the severe punishment of Logar, one of the Emperor's most devoted sons, who worshipped the Emperor as a god due to his upbringing, which went against the imperial truth at the time, ironically, which was that the Emperor was not a god, and there were no gods or superpowers, and that the Imperium was governed by truth and science. Now, his worship and conversions of his conquered worlds to his religion slowed him down to an unacceptable level, and he refused to stop his worship. So, the Emperor ordered an entire world that was devoted to him to be destroyed by the Ultramarines, with the Word-Bearers, the Legion of Logar, to witness it. This drove Logar into a deep despair, and later into the hands of the Chaos Gods as the first fallen Primarch, igniting the plans that would eventually lead to the Horus Heresy. However, the true beginning of the Horus Heresy was when Horus was wounded on the moons of Davin by a Xenos blade known as an anathema. The moon had been corrupted by Nurgle, and Horus's forces were attacked by demons from foul mists when trying to find a traitorous commander, one of Horus's old friends, in fact. Finally confronting the traitor, who was also corrupted by Nurgle, Horus was wounded by the deadly blade, and not even his superior physiology could prevent him from falling deathly ill. Desperate to help, his elite Astartes commanders of the Sons of Horus, known as the Mournival, took Horus to the Serpent Lodge on Davin itself, the planet on which the moon orbited. The lodge, of course, was filled with mutant psychers who promised they could cleanse Horus's wounds. However, this was a trick that the corrupt Word-Bearer's chaplain Erebus had planned, and whilst Horus was being healed, his soul was cast into the warp to show Horus visions of the past, when he was being gestated in the Emperor's labs, and the future, which was actually the Imperium today. Now, Horus was shown the future that we know of in the Imperium, where the Emperor was cast down, and the Imperium began to worship him as a god. However, Erebus hid this from Horus, and tried to convince him that this is what would happen if he won the galaxy for the Emperor, that he would be forgotten, and other sons which were more beloved by the people would be raised above him, until the Emperor was the only one who was remembered. Now, this excited a jealousy inside Horus, which he had not really known existed, but did exist between him and Sanguinius, his other closest and more angelic brother, who was, although not as much a military genius, was one of the most beloved of the Primarchs in the Imperium due to his more angelic nature. Now this future was one of the most convincing parts of Erebus's vision. However, he had not revealed himself at this point, and was hiding his true identity. However, Magnus the Red, Horus's brother Primarch and an incredibly powerful psyker, detected this attempt to try and convert Horus, and interceded in the vision, trying to convince Horus not to turn away from the Emperor, and that what was being told was a lie. He even revealed Erebus's true identity to Horus, and revealed that the nature of the corruption he would be agreeing to if he decided to turn against the Emperor. Now this is the crux of the heresy, and if of course Horus had believed Magnus at this point, then the heresy would never have happened, and it would have likely been crushed in its infancy. However, Erebus's work had been done, and Horus had been convinced that he no longer should follow the Emperor and should instead invest himself in greater powers. So he cast Magnus's offer off and decided to rebel against the Emperor and join with the powers of chaos to overthrow his father. Now that he had been corrupted, Horus needed to sway the legions in order to fight against the Emperor. Now the War Master's primary concern were his brother Primarchs. Now the first to be turned was Angron of the World Eaters, Fulgrim of the Emperor's Children, and Moritarian of the Death Guard, whose attitudes and flaws made them susceptible to the powers of chaos. This is not to mention Logar, who had already been corrupted years before. Conrad Kurz of the Night Lords, Alfarius and Omegaron of the Alpha Legion, and Perturabos, Iron Warriors, were also joined Horus against the Imperium, although their reasons were more mortal about rivalries and feeling no love for the Imperium, rather than wanting to worship chaos directly. Now, it was at this time that Magnus tried to warn the Emperor of Horus's betrayal, using forbidden sorcery to try and breach the wards of Terra and deliver his message, despite such practices being banned by the Emperor himself at the proclamation of Nicaea. Now, his attempt to breach the wards worked, but instead of being able to deliver his message, demons poured through the breach and began attacking the new webway that the Emperor had been trying to create. Distressed by this attack, Magnus retreated without delivering his message. Now he retreated to his homeworld of Prospero, which was then attacked by the Space Wolves under the Emperor's orders, because the Emperor now believed that Magnus was a traitor defying his orders and consorting with chaos. And this led to the burning of Prospero, which will have its own video at another time, but of course did almost destroy the Thousand Suns Legion, who were Magnus's soldiers, and eventually led them into the arms of the Chaos Gods. Now, Horus also knew at this time that some of his brothers would never join him. Lionel Johnson of the Dark Angels, Sanguinius of the Blood Angels, and Gulliman of the Ultramarines were considered by Horus to be some of his greatest threats, being some of the most beloved and tactically brilliant Primarchs, and so were sent away on missions far from Terra, with him still in the guise of the loyal Crusade leader, then devised traps to keep them from returning to Terra in the event of a siege and possibly killing his brothers before they could join against him. Now, Rorgal Dawn and his Imperial Fists and Khan's White Scars were too close to Terra to contact without arousing suspicion despite their loyalty. The others, Corax's Raven Guard, Vulcan's Salamanders and Russ's Space Wolves, were also considered too loyal, and Ferrus Manus of the Iron Hands was attempted to be corrupted by Fulgrim. However, he of course was too loyal and rejected Fulgrim's offer out of hand. Now knowing who would support them and who was against them, the traitor legions decided to start purging their ranks in order to be a united front against the Imperium. This led to the scouring of Isstvan III. Now this was the attempt to scour their legions of the Loyal Marines. What happened was that the Loyal Marines were sent down as the first wave, then the planet was virus-bombed and the Loyalists were mostly destroyed. Although some survived on the world, under rubble or hidden away, whilst others fled aboard the ship the Eisenstein to warn the Imperium of the War Master's treachery, although some of these Marines would later come to form the core of the Grey Knights, the demon-hunting Astartes of the Inquisition. Now, it was also at this point that the traitorous elements of the Imperial Army, the Mechanicus with their Titan legions, and the other Imperial forces defected to join Horus, forming into the army he would later use to support his invasion of Terra. It was also at this point that the Tech Priests of Mars descended into a civil war, with the Dark Mechanicus attempting to overthrow the traditional order and follow Horus with his ideas of change and invention as opposed to the dogmatic ways of the old Mechanicus. Although this is something again that will be dealt with in its own video. Now, one of the most crucial and brutal elements of the heresy came next, which was the drop site massacre of Isstvan V. Now, this was an ambush by the traitors against the Loyalists. The drop site massacre was where the Raven Guard, the Iron Hands, the Salamanders, Night Lords, Iron Warriors, Word Bearers, and Alpha Legion attacked the traitors, hoping their overwhelming force would destroy the Sons of Horus, the World Eaters, the Death Guard, and the Emperor's children who were arrayed against them. Unfortunately for the Raven Guard, Salamanders, and Iron Hands, their fellow Loyalists were in fact all traitors, and not long after landing, these 3 Loyalist legions were surrounded by 8 traitor legions, ripping them apart. Now, the details will be mentioned again in a later video, but needless to say, the Loyalists were completely devastated and lost a huge number of their men, with only the bare minimum escaping. To compound this, Ferrus Manus was killed by the demonically possessed Fulgrim, the first Primarch officially to die in the Imperium, and Vulcan was captured by Conrad Kurz. Only Korax of the Raven Guard escaped, and he was almost unhinged by the horror he had witnessed and the death of his legion. Now, with these threats removed, or at least greatly reduced, the path to Terra was almost open for the traitors. The Ultramarines were still embattled at Calth, and the Space Wolves were bogged down, and the Dark Angels as well were too far to help the Imperium at this time. Only the Imperial Fists on Terra, the White Scars, and the recently returned Blood Angels, who were still battered from their recent conflicts, stood on Terra between the armies of Chaos and the Emperor. Now, what came next was many years of warfare, which I will of course again summarise in a later video specifically about what happened during the Horus Heresy. However, the next major conflict and the most important part of the Horus Heresy was the Siege of Terra, which happened at the end of the Horus Heresy. Now, the siege began with the arrival of the traitors' fleet, blasting past the outer planets of the solar system and restocking near Mars, which was still locked in their civil war. When they arrived at Terra, the immense fleet, led by Horus's flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, laid to waste the orbital defences and began landing troops. Now, again, this conflict was immense, and billions died in the siege, be they Astartes, Titan, or human soldier on either side. It was centred around the Imperial Palace, which today would be located where the Himalayas are. There, the Imperial Fists, the Blood Angels, along with Titan soldiers and the Adeptus Custodes, led by Dawn and Sanguinius themselves, defended the gates against the traitor armies, whilst the Emperor sat in the Golden Throne, trying to keep his webway sealed against the demonic hordes amassing on the other side. Outside the walls, the Imperials used guerrilla tactics, led by Khan and his bike-mounted White Scarf Legion, to prevent the rearmament and reinforcement of the traitors as the battle went on. Now, this war was almost indescribable, and again, another video will give more detail about what happened. However, many times during this conflict, the palace seemed on the verge of falling, but the defenders held, with mighty combats happening around the palace, which were immortalised in the later Imperium. The most remembered is, of course, Sanguinius' fight against Kabanda the Bloodthirster at the Ultima Gate. Now, by day 55, the palace was still holding, barely, but the traitors had been bled almost dry themselves, and Horus received intelligence that the Ultramarines, Dark Angels, and Space Wolves were closing on Terra to reinforce the Loyalists. No longer able to wait and lay siege to the planet, Horus lowered the shields on his battle barge to taunt the Emperor and get him to attack them directly. Unsure of when reinforcement would actually arrive, the Emperor took the bait and teleported to Horus's battle barge with his son Sanguinius and Dawn, along with the strike force of Astartes and Custodes. However, their teleport was disrupted and the party arrived scattered. It was Sanguinius who found Horus first and fought him alone while still injured from the battle below. However, Horus was of course empowered by chaos, and even at full strength, Sanguinius would have had a struggle to actually defeat Horus in combat. Horus, of course, tried to convert his once closest brother, and when that actually failed, he brutally killed Sanguinius, throttling him with his power claw before snapping his neck. Sanguinius' only victory was to inflict a chink in Horus's armour, although if this was physical or mental we don't actually know at this stage. Now, the Emperor was the next to arrive on the bridge where this conflict was happening. Now, the combat between Horus and the Emperor was huge. Again, this will be described in the video relating to the Battle of Terra. However, this was essentially two demigods battling against one another. Eventually, the Emperor did defeat Horus, but was wounded almost unto death by this conflict. It was Dawn that arrived next, finding them in the ruins of the bridge, distraught by the death of his angelic brother and the near death of his father. He took both the dead body and the nearly dead one back to Terra via teleport, and left Horus's corpse to rot on the bridge. With Horus gone, the traitors quickly fell and were pushed back to the Eye of Terror in a time known as the Great Scouring. Dawn entombed the Emperor on the Golden Throne to hold the gate closed against the demons on the other side, and he, along with the last remaining loyal Primarchs and the remaining Council of Terror, began to rebuild the Imperium, purging the traitors from the ranks, restructuring the government into the High Lords of Terror amongst other things, and splitting the legions into chapters. It was from this point that the Great Crusade had come to an end, and the Age of the Imperium began. Now, I hope that's been a comprehensive overview of what actually happened during the Horus Heresy. Again, I've said it is quite brief because I do intend to do a full series on the Horus Heresy in the future, but I thought it's been so long since I started this channel and I've mentioned it so many times that people did need to hear exactly what happened during the Horus Heresy and why it was such a defining moment in Imperial history. And so, I hope that's covered all my bases so far. If you have a question, or if you have anything else you'd like to ask about the Horus Heresy or anything in relating to the lore, you can ask it in the comments section below or send me a personal message. If you'd like to ask more detailed questions, or you'd like to interact with more members of the Vaults of Terra community, you can go to the Vox Relay, which is the Vaults of Terra forum, which is populated by many people who understand the lore and are able to answer your questions and just interact on a fan level. So, I hope you've enjoyed the videos today. Videos will resume more regularly soon. We'll be starting doing the videos to round up the Space Marines, so they'll be done, and we'll also be continuing with our Imperial Guard videos. So, I hope you've enjoyed the video today. See you next time on the Vaults of Terra.